There are certain characters in Genshin Impact that you don't really see me play on the channel. Most notably, I don't really play Hu Tao or Bennett or Xiangling, and I'll speak in particular why I really don't like Xiangling at all. But before we do that, let's just give you a bit of background. So, obviously, like most people that have been playing Genshin since day one, there was obviously a point in my Genshin history, on my account history, where I had to use characters like Hu Tao, I had to use characters like Melt Ganyu, with Xiangling and Bennett, and the reason why I had to use them to clear stuff like the Spiral Abyss and event was because that was kind of all that I really had available at the time. So what you're seeing in the background is the old team, the team of 1.4 Spiral Abyss, and it's been a while since I played Hu Tao, so please just excuse my Hu Tao. It's not good, and I probably will just try my best in the background. It's whatever. So with that being said, you guys know that I still play Sucrose and Klee quite a lot because I just absolutely like Klee. I think this is just my personal opinion. Klee is less clunky than Ganyu and Hu Tao. That's just my sort of personal take, and that's why I kind of like using her. She's really, really cool and has kind of lots of little, tiny little bits of things that you can do. Whereas I feel Hu Tao and Ganyu themselves kind of lock you into using well, you're not really locked into using certain teams, but you're locked into a certain playstyle with them, and that is a bit less flexible than I would really sort of like from my end. So that's just from the play perspective. But from a damage perspective, look, you can't go wrong with either of them. They're still very, very strong units, and there's no real reason why I don't use them. There's nothing outright that I don't like about them. It's just that in Genshin Impact, there are new characters that are being released, and the new characters have new features. And the new characters also allow you to re-experience or recontextualize what you've already experienced in Genshin Impact, but just in a different way. So, for instance, take Yelan. Yelan allows you to just run around the map in a very fun way. If you have something like a Kazuha, I've got like now Venti on my other accounts as well. You can just sort of glide. You can just do things in a bit of a new way. So you tend to play with the new characters because that's how Hoyoverse sells them. They make them interesting and different from what you've got. So it's only natural that some characters you will sort of outgrow and leave behind, and others that you'll get, and it's no shame on the characters that you kind of leave behind. So that's just sort of why I don't play some of those characters, whereas other characters like Klee and Sucrose I definitely want to play. In fact, I must say I think Sucrose is probably my favorite Animo support. You can just do so much with her. You can do so much with Sucrose in so many different teams, and that's just why I kind of really like her as well. It's very much in the same way with Ayaka and Kokomi. They can fit into so many different ways of playing. You can do the whole Fury Crafter, TDS, whatever, boring playstyle of Kokomi, or you can do the fun main DPS sort of Taser or sort of other funky variants that you guys have seen me on the channel. And that's what I love about characters like that. They're not stiff. There are many different uses, whereas the problem with Hu Tao and Ganyu is the fact that they are main DPS, and the problem with that is all that they can be. They can only be main DPS and so on. Ganyu to a bit of a lesser extent than Hu Tao and so on, but I mean, you can always replace them. And this is the one thing that I've also mentioned in the past about Xiangling, why I said, look, the character is overrated, because there are just many different teams that can also give you like the same effective team damage output that a team with Xiangling can give you. So for instance, if you had like two teams, let's say Rider National, that gave you over a 20-second interval like 55k damage, well, that is something that you could also replicate with other teams that do not include Bennett or Xiangling. And the key thing about Genshin Impact, that if you're a veteran player that you might have realized by now, is not the overall damage per second number that you're doing, but it's how you do that damage. In other words, in that 20-second window, how did your damage come about? So for instance, characters like Eula focus a lot of the attention on getting a huge burst at one instance, whereas other teams, like for instance Taser teams of Kokomi and so on, focus on giving you a continuous sort of a range of damage. Rider National is a team where you've got like bursts of like very high damage, and then it sort of just tapers down a bit to give you more consistent damage, etc, etc. And at the end of the day, when you look at the resulting distribution, or in other words the entire range of outcomes of damage that one team can do versus another, you really do find that there's lots of overlap, there's lots of similarities, but at the end of the day, if your team that includes Bennett and Xiangling can do 55k DPS, and let's say, for example, my team can only do 45, but the Abyss's requirement is only 35, then at the end of the day, does it really matter which team we use? It really just matters, do you like the characters and are they fun to play with? Because that's ultimately what this game boils down to. So now let's talk into a bit about why I really hate Xiangling and Bennett in particular. Well, obviously I think the biggest problem with Bennett is the fact that he's just plain overtuned. I think no 4-star should have as much utility, but I must say that from a C6 perspective, he does kind of drop off. Particularly if you build at, for instance, in my Raiden sort of comps, I do find that it's just much easier to use Yai Miko than a Bennett, because the additional damage that your Yai will do will outweigh or outstrip the benefit from Bennett, because my Raiden Shogun rocks an R5 engulfing lightning, so her attack's already like almost 3000 once she goes into elemental burst and gets all that extra damage multiplied. So a Bennett there is not as useful as just an off-field Yai hitting the enemies for like 35k pop on each one of the Thunderbolts. So there is a drop-off to Bennett, but you don't see that drop-off as an F2P. With Xiangling, I hate her because of the fact that she can take any buff in the game, and for instance like Bennett's Elemental Burst, and let's say your Bennett's Elemental Burst is on the ground and it's been active for like 11 seconds. Just before it expires, if your Xiangling presses Q, at that moment, she effectively extends that buff to herself, and not only that, she can then run around with that buff anywhere on the field. So she bypasses Bennett's cooldown requirement, she bypasses the sort of elemental burst, she bypasses the restricted range, so in other words the drop off to having the elemental burst, and that to me is very cheesy and a very unhealthy mechanic. It's not like Klee, who can also like snapshot Bennett's burst, but with Klee you are forced to be on the field. It is conditional, and anything that is as unconditional as what Xiangling does is not a good mechanic, and that's why I find the hero to be cheesy, lazy, and ultimately at the highest end she does drop off quite significantly, so I just don't really need her. If I want to clear the perpetual mechanical ray in 32 seconds, by the way it's in a previous video, I definitely won't use either Bennett or Xiangling. But yeah guys, that is why I don't play certain characters anymore, and why I just flat out refuse to play others. Thanks for watching and cheers!